Right. So our guest today is none other than, it's really cool when you interview your friends.
It's kind of cool.
So making this intro is like, oh my gosh, friends are fire, man. But a trailblazer in the sports industry as well as the sports media industry, right? Current operating partner at Arctos Partners, where you focus on enhancing digital content strategy and strengthening the digital media strategies of the firm's franchise partners. Prior to this role, you spent a lot of time as the head of U.S. sports partnerships and head of global content partnerships at Twitter, where you revolutionize how fans engage with sports content.
Revolutionize.
I use the word, okay, revolutionized.
Heard you.
Flowers, take them.
Ugh.
But how fans engage with sports content on social media, obviously from amplifying athlete voices to creating immersive fan experience, your work has left an indelible mark on this industry.
Woo.
So
Gas me up.
with over 10 years of experience, you've been instrumental in leading strategic partnerships with major sports leagues and changing the way fans engage with their favorite teams, athletes, and media companies. If you haven't put it together, this could only be one person. Tjay Adeshola.
Put
Big
spice
boy,
on
a
this.
little
Well
bit,
done.
a
Well
little
done.
bit.
How are you?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
It's cool to see
Yeah,
you. It's been a minute.
always great to see you.
Yeah.
And it's always like it's a different country every time we link up.
That is a fact. It's also a flex, but it shows how.
But is it really?
No, we're blessed, man. God has blessed us with the ability to travel the world with sport.
Yeah.
Like what?
Yeah,
You know what I'm saying?
I mean, we're just a bunch of African kids who had a love for sports and who had goals and
That's right.
dreams and looked up to people and found something and made something incredible out of it. You know
There
what I
you
mean?
go. There you go.
And so, how does it feel? Obviously, you're at a sporting event or in the sports space and have been consistently for a long time. Does the feeling ever get remedial or mundane?
It's a
We're
good-
here at the Olympics, and so it's like it's the Olympics for most people.
Yeah.
For us, it's another day at work. But is it really?
You know what? I try to. Wow, that's a good question because it is a day at work, but there's also so much favor in the fact that this is the type of work that we get to do, and a job is to hang out with a friend at the Olympics in Paris, of all cities. So I don't take this for granted. I mean, growing up, I was really intentional about wanting to work in sports. I missed too many layups to know that I was never going to step foot professionally
Can
on the
I
court.
ask you about that? Because obviously, from an African to another African, we always get that question, like your parents really okayed you to have this aspiration to work in sports. How was that like in y'all's household? When you were like, I'm gonna work in sports, I clearly am not gonna play it,
Yeah.
but we're gonna figure something out.
You know, it's funny you mentioned that. I mean, sports was actually sports was core to my upbringing. So growing up was just my mother and I. So single parent household. She's a superhero.
Shout out to the
Yeah,
mamas.
Yeah. High
Yes.
five, high
Well
five.
done, mama.
So
You
she,
know?
I lived with a real life superhero. Truly, I watched her put her cape on each and every day, and as a function of that, because she worked so much, sports was how I developed brotherhood. Sports was how I learned lessons like teamwork and surviving through adversity and navigating conflict. All of the things learned them through sport by way of watching and participating. So for me, sport. Alongside my superhuman mother, sport was something that actually raised me. So I was really intentional in knowing that I was going to work in and around sports in some capacity, whether it was on the pitch, on the field, on the court, or in the
Somewhere surrounding
margins.
it.
Yeah.
And I think that, funny, as a single mother myself, I often make jokes. My daughter's literally here off the set.
That's it.
And I had to drag her here because she went to go play in her soccer tournament. And I'm like, you're spoiled. You know what I mean? She's like, Mom, I don't want to go with you to work. Why? I'm always with you at work. I want to play my sport. I'm like, man, sometimes it's babysitting.
That's
like,
right.
it is what it is. And, kids have a lot of energy, but the blessing in that is, what comes out of it, right? And I think similar to you, maybe it's your experience, getting to understand the ecosystem from a very, and obviously I'm sure you're incredibly smart from a young age. It's like, look, not everybody can touch the hardwood, but this ecosystem has to be powered some way, somehow. So let me explore the additional roles that exist, you know what I mean, in this space. So when you were younger, like, what was your first, you, all right, cool. You were like, I ain't gonna be no hooper, lebs ain't going in. Cool.
Yeah.
What?
To be clear, I was making my layups. I just missed a couple left-handed ones. To be
you,
clear, you ain't
listen,
gonna have me out here looking
I,
like I'm just
I,
blowing,
I'm gonna let you
smoking
have it.
layups.
I'm gonna let you have it.
Yeah, yeah.
But okay, when you were like, maybe these left hands ain't going in, so let me look to the left and figure something out. What was your first thought? Was it okay? It's not the court. What is it gonna be?
Uh, Good question. So I answered that a few different ways. I mean, growing up, I was fortunate because I'm from the DMV, DC area.
Just grew up around sport,
Yeah,
like literally legends.
my
You know what I
first
mean?
like football memory was a black quarterback, Doug Williams, hoisting a Super Bowl trophy, right? And it just so happened that one of the biggest athletes in the world was a Nigerian man named Hakeem Olajuwon, right? So
Talk to
yeah,
me.
so I was so fortunate to see a dude with a long last name like mine, from the same country as my family and I, wearing number 34. Like that was inspiration. Each and every day I watched hoops. So my thought was, all right, I'm gonna work in some type of basketball capacity or in some type of media company. So while I was at college, ESPN used to routinely come to the University of Georgia. Shout out UGA.
Was this college? Was it college game day and
It
such an early
was.
college game
It was
day?
college game
Yeah,
day. That's
yeah,
right. That's
yeah,
right.
yeah.
So they because football was king at Georgia, they came to Athens one day, and I knew that they were coming. So I don't. I either got up really early. Or I didn't sleep. I probably didn't sleep because I was in college, but I got to where they were recording College Game Day around 6 a.m. or so, and my objective was just post up and find out who that one is. You know who he or she is. They got the clipboard. They calling
Calling
shots. They
shots.
have an aura about them,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
I kind of stood in the back and pleasantly stalked the operation.
yeah, yeah.
A few hours in, I'm like, all right, I think I know who this person is. I approached him, said, hey, I've been watching this operation for a while. You look like the boss. People love being gassed, first and foremost. So I was like, you look like the boss. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm a student here, and I'm a massive fan of ESPN. I'm also looking for an internship. And he was like, how'd you know that I was running this? I don't know if he was running it. I think he was.
It's like, I just kind of saw you walking
Right,
around, calling
right.
the shots. I've only been here like 8 hours.
Right. So he gave me his business card that turned into an internship at ESPN,
Yeah.
which was a dream.
Do you remember this person's name?
Yeah, I do. I do.
Yeah.
David Zaslowski. Yeah. And that ESPN internship, there were thousands of people. They said it was harder than getting to Harvard. Thousands of people who applied, but there were only a handful of us who were selected. And he was a conduit to getting the internship and me also getting a job. And once I got my job at ESPN and I was there, I'm walking in the cafeteria. To my right is Magic Johnson, and to my left is Scott Van Pelt and Stuart Scott. It was a really special time to be there,
Yeah.
and I got to watch the sports media business from inside the machine of the biggest worldwide leader in sports, the biggest brand in sports.
That is
Yeah.
incredible. So, I mean, obviously, a lot has evolved
Yeah,
since
yeah,
then,
yeah.
right? And it's always, I think it's important for people like you and I to tell the stories of humble beginnings. Because I think that oftentimes people look and it looks great, right? But they don't necessarily know how you got there, but also you made a way. You know what I mean? You had a vision, you found a path, you made a way, but also things like mentorship, things like learning from the best,
right.
right? Sometimes you want to be the best, not sometimes you go to the best, right? Obviously, you had an illustrious career there, and it was a great foundation and a great stepping stone. At what point did you feel like, okay, I've gotten what I've needed, and it's time to make the next step and to get where you got next after that?
That's always one of my favorite questions because it's the question, one, that mentees ask about a lot as they're trying to chart their path, and peers for that matter. And two, it's a question that we as professionals routinely ask ourselves. At what point do I pivot? You ask players who transition from living on a basketball court or on a football field to transitioning to not being an active player anymore. At some point, you got to look in the mirror and say, all right, I feel at peace with this decision. So for me, um, it was quite interesting actually. At ESPN at the time, we started to incorporate digital and social within the shows. So you would watch Sports Nation, and tweets and
That's okay.
social commentary would power specific segments of the show. Uh, Furthermore, we started to make money off of tweets. We would sell them to brands, and at the time, I'm like, oh, this social thing ain't going nowhere. Uh, it's how I'm engaging with my homies more often than not. And these companies seem to be hiring. So I did what every young professional did. I looked out my queue both ways, made sure nobody was coming,
Like,
and I
look, I'm
hit on
not
LinkedIn.
leaving
You know what I'm
just
saying?
yet,
I
but
got on, I got on that LinkedIn. I applied and got a call back within 72 hours. And that turned into a decade at Twitter. You know, I got on before we went public and before we had verticals and categories. It was just vibes and problem solving. That was it.
it was tweets, vibes, and problem
You know what
solving.
I'm
You know what I
saying?
mean?
Like,
And 140 characters at the time before
yeah.
expansion and the likes. Yeah.
And it was special because it was one of those was and is one of those tool services that is pivotal for media companies, for athletes, for entertainers, for political campaigns,
For the entire, like,
for
for a global infrastructure as
everything.
a whole, right?
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
Right.
It revolutionized the way we consume news too,
Right.
because we'd have to wait on TV or read a newspaper.
Right.
You getting it in real time,
Right.
in your palm. So that was it. Felt really, really empowering to work at a service that was really revolutionizing media.
Do you think that it would have been, and you obviously mentioned that you were there before the company went public,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Do you think that obviously things would have looked different had you come in after? Like, what was the importance of that segment, right before obviously the IPO occurred? And how did that form what happened on the other
Nobody's
side?
ever asked me that question before.
Ooh, gas me up. I like that.
No,
Go ahead.
it's a good question.
Yeah.
What it allowed me to do was juxtapose how we problem solved and how we identified goals and objectives prior to being publicly traded, to being beholden to the street
Right.
and shareholders, and that forced and
The
required
streets is
us
crazy.
that required us to mature.
Yeah.
It required the company to mature at a much faster rate. But I think we all benefited from that. But I think, to answer your question more concisely, it forced me and everybody really at the time to think about the business in a more elevated way and to think about it in a more mature fashion. All right,
Right.
let's create verticals.
So now the
Let's
verticals
build a
came
business.
in.
That's right.
Right, because I was going to say that's probably was the emphasis of the verticals being created, because now no longer are you a blanket service.
That's right.
You now have to service industries, and these industries have key objectives, goals
Sure.
that look entirely different. So tell me about the day that the sports department was, came to inception, and how you came, to lead that.
Yeah, I was always snooping around. Like, one of the things, I'm just a really curious
I'm
person.
seeing this through line. I'm like, okay, TJ.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. I tend to be quite curious,
Yeah.
and at the time, when you work in sports, you always gonna have that bug, whether you leave and come back or find different ways to work in and around the space. So at the time, I was really focused on supporting sales and marketing brands, the Gatorades, Anheuser-Busch's, and they all spend
had
heavy
sports
sponsorship in sports.
partnerships.
That's right.
Right.
I was more revenue at the time, and when somebody sent me a blank email and said, "Yo, sports, Twitter, New York, would you do it?" And that was it. I moved to New York, and I got to work with the biggest brands in sports, and we got to create something really special. I think what I'm most proud of is, yes, like, of course the NBA is gonna respond to an email and we
Just
send it
take
at
all
the
my
time.
questions out of my mouth, because I was going to say, well, listen, we don't even have the time to just talk about all of that which was created from your time as U.S. Sports Partnerships
Mm-hmm.
all the way to the head of global content partnerships. Like we would need some space and
Yeah,
time to
yeah,
summarize
yeah.
that. But if you had to pick, and it cannot be NBA Twitter, even though we
Mm-hmm.
thank you royally. But if you had to pick, what are you most proud of
Yeah,
as fan?
so more broad, I think NBA Twitter is a microcosm of it, but more broadly, like it's one thing to work with sports publishers, and that was fire and dope and all the things, but I'm most excited about that we built community.
Community.
You know what I'm saying? And that community, yes, NBA Twitter was a massive one, but there were super hyper engaged fans of women's sports at the time that really got no coverage and were completely underserved,
So
but they
basically,
were
what you're
hyper
saying
engaged.
is WNBA Twitter is not new.
No, no, no. It's been there for. We did a partnership with the WNBA in 2017. Like I've been outside. That is
Y'all
one
heard
thing I
that?
will
It's been a
say.
thing,
I've
okay?
I've been outside, and it's been for me. That's where the excitement of the work came when you found these really hyper engaged audiences and communities that really just needed a little nudge, a little
That I
support,
mean, right?
a little support
Yeah,
and resourcing,
yeah.
and that's one of the things that we did really well. And, I look at some of the work we did in and around the W, like, man, that was kind of ahead of its time because the moment that we're experiencing right now with the women's sports more broadly, but more specifically the W was
It was almost
super
like you
special.
guys like forecasted. I was always curious to see how Twitter would engage with the moment.
Mm-hmm.
From the gosh, I could not that I study, but I study, but from the tweets on confetti
Yeah,
to,
yeah.
I mean, there's so many ways that I think it became a thing. That
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but to your point, I'd like to call attention to the fact that this begun with what the space is in now, which is revenue generation,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
This became obviously a tool that brought massive amounts of funding to partners,
That's right.
and it's an ecosystem that spread the wealth. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That spread the wealth, and so I always just, I think that we think that social is all fun and games, but there are people who have built $1 billion brands off of their thoughts, off of
Yeah.
sharing their thoughts, off of this community. So, talks a little bit about, one of the most unique monetization, properties that you worked on in that time.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the reason why I like to say I have a good personality, but I think the reason why I have such great relationships and partnerships at the league level, the team level, the athlete level is because we were a tool that helped people build businesses, right? Like it was a tool that you use to achieve whatever objective that
Said
you
end
had,
goal, right?
So and more often than not, with leagues and teams, monetization was a key objective. So we created a model that allowed teams to publish all this amazing content on Twitter, and we would pair them with brands to help them monetize that content.
Yeah.
And that became, a multi million dollar, nearly $1 billion business for us. Because we'd say, oh, wait a minute, the NBA tweets out assists every night. Let's call up State Farm and see if State Farm wants to travel alongside those assists for the State
Right.
Farm assists.
Right.
Right. So we created a business, and it's one of the things I tell my my mentees and folks that I'm really pouring into is like the vibes are cool and work that makes you feel good is from a business perspective is always fulfilling.
Fulfilling for sure.
But how do you connect the vibes with the business objectives,
With the
right?
other vibes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
ultimately, if it's just standalone vibes, is it's unlikely to sustain
There's an
and it's unlikely
expiration
to
date to
drive the
that.
business. That's right. But if you can
1,000%.
connect those or tether them to
A yield.
business objectives, right? Like substantial, like tangible outcome.
Yeah.
Whether it's revenue or like really specific ROI that drives a
Right.
business,
Right.
then you cooking with
I was
gas.
gonna say, I mean, obviously, yes, the focus is on revenue, but there's this other big R called reach, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Which obviously
yeah.
there is a value to reach because
Mhm.
reach is then ultimately a vehicle to revenue, right? So
Mhm.
there that can be defined in different ways. And I think that when I talk about that, I go back to where we're from and a market like Africa,
Mhm.
for example, right now. Obviously, I'm Kenyan, and a big shout out to what we call KOT. It's a whole community of Kenyans on Twitter that,
Yeah, yeah.
it has a brand, has power. and you're seeing things now like, not to take it political, but it is what it is. You're seeing an entire political revolution being orchestrated like live on Twitter. You see what
Yeah,
I'm saying?
yeah.
And so, yes, there's a monetization component, but there's, a change component in that this has become, like I said, a tool to organize, right? So you have the spaces and you have just the reach that, you know what I mean, the use of such communities. So it's interesting to think about when you think about returns, what does that look like? And what does that look like for each different community?
And I feel so fortunate to have worked at the intersection, really not the intersection, to work at the launch pad of media changing and the way we communicate changing for better or worse.
Period.
I mean, you think about like the role of TikTok in these Olympics, like how damn near
The TikTok
every athlete,
Olympics.
it's insane,
Right.
and folks obviously are leveraging Threads and Instagram and X
Yeah.
and Snapchat.
Yeah.
Who, I was able to kind of sit at the forefront of that change, and now we're seeing the Olympics unfold on digital
Literally
and social
digitally.
media.
Right.
As soon as they're handed their medals, they're handed a phone and they take a selfie, and that selfie lives on social immediately. That's before an interview, that's before press, it's before anything. And I feel really fortunate to play
To
a
have put
role in
them,
that shift.
it's interesting because you ever think about, I know you think about it from a landscape changing, but do you ever think about it like it's almost like you all put the power back in people's hands, and not that it ever wasn't, but you almost put a tool that then allowed people to have an incredible amount of power, right? That's got to be empowering.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the beauty of innovation, and we're starting to see it with AI now. Those who leverage innovation to disrupt, or those who are early adopters, had the opportunity to leverage innovation to disrupt. And I think that we were able to do that. And when Snapchat came, it did that. When TikTok came, it did that. When
Next thing
Instagram,
is gonna
it did
come. Yeah.
right. So
Yeah.
and AI is doing that as we speak. So
Right.
yeah, I get really excited about it. I used to tell before drafts, we would meet with agents and sometimes the athletes, and I would say, "Yo, within a few keystrokes, you can reach the world, like right here. Be careful, because too much is who's given, much is required, right?
That
Like,
10 times
you know what I'm
again.
saying? So
Yeah.
if you on the Casamigos, you might want to
I want to put your
delete the
phone to
app
your
for a
amigos.
little bit. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it is. Social is a tool that allows people to reach the world instantaneously.
Yeah.
That never existed as we were coming up. So, yeah, it was cool to create a business around it. And we talk about reach, monetization, and innovation. But what was also a responsibility that I felt was to make sure people understood how impactful and powerful the tool could be for better or worse. So those were some of the things that I got
I
excited
feel like the
about.
theme of our conversation right now is the R word. So we have revolutionize, we got reach, we got responsibility, we got
Yeah,
revenue.
yeah,
But now, obviously, what an incredible phase that was in your life,
yeah,
and getting a chance to witness that beside you and with you, and all of that was amazing. But now, we've moved on. You know
yeah,
what I mean? To bigger, to things. We've moved on, and now you have an incredible title, which I don't know if people really understand. You know
yeah,
what I mean?
yeah,
So I'm like, let's take a second, because operating partner is heavy. Obviously, we understand. I don't even know, if I want to give you a second to talk about Arctos
yeah.
Partners and talk about the new role. And we're not reintroducing. We're just we're continuing the story. So talk a little bit about that and what that looks like.
One of the, we've talked about innovation and disruption a lot, and one of the things that we've seen in our lifetime is athletes, individuals, entertainers being more intentional about pursuing ownership and equity and understanding. All right, yeah, I could get like a brand bag for sure, but what if we change the terms? Like, can I actually own a piece of that particular brand in exchange for my marketing services? Recently, I read that Caleb Williams, who was the number one draft pick for the Chicago Bears, asked for a salary to be paid to his LLC, right? For obvious reasons. But like in years ago, we saw Russell Kuhn,
Yeah.
shout out to the continent,
Yes.
who required that the NFL pay him in Bitcoin.
In Bitcoin.
So as we think about like disruption and like how athletes, entertainers, individuals are approaching business, it's very much through the lens of ownership. So for me, like young TJ was always like, man, it'd be dope to own a team one day. And Arctos has provided me this incredible proximity to that. Arctos is the only firm on planet Earth that's approved to own multiple franchises
yes.
in all major leagues that allow for institutional capital. Sports are an asset class. They generate a significant amount of revenue.
Yes.
They drive really sticky, hyper engaged fandom, and they oftentimes exist in the biggest markets in the world.
Right.
So, what's interesting about it is you don't have to walk into an arena or on a pitch or a court to have a deep affinity for this thing. You might be born into it. You might have went to a school that you owe a bunch of student loans to that makes you tethered to it.
That still takes your money when you need season tickets. See what I mean?
So, that's the beauty of this thing called sports. But because of that, the idea of sport as an asset class is something that's really exciting to explore. So, I mean, we are owners of PSG, Golden State Warriors, Sacramento Kings, Los Angeles Dodgers, Liverpool, Aston Martin, 20 plus teams. And I have the ability to work with each and every one of the teams across our portfolio to help them think about digital and social as a way to elevate their valuation.
Right.
I firmly believe that within the controllable assets that the teams have, social and digital is a controllable asset that they can actually wiggle with the most to elevate their valuation. Because if you're dope on digital, people will follow, people will transact, people will deepen their affinity for you, which unlocks a whole different opportunity for increased fandom and more reach,
1000%.
as you mentioned. So it's dope. Simply put, it's a really, really, really incredible private equity firm that's solely based on sports investments.
Right. And so now, you've obviously moved from an activation standpoint into a consulting adversarial role. What's the largest adversarial? And then I mean, listen, you from a doer to teller now. At this point, what has changed career wise? What has changed responsibility wise? Obviously, is it? There's obviously a hands-on component now, but is it a theoretical? More so based on theory, and or are you going in and basically saying, if I were you, I would consider X, Y, and Z. Do you feel? Sometimes it's like a tug and a pull and a push from being able to enact a strategy, for example, that you completely sold on, versus saying, these are my thoughts. Now, whether or not you choose to do so isn't entirely up to you.
Yeah, well, the first thing I would say is I'm learning a new language. I don't have a finance background. I've worked in media. I've worked in sport. So I'm learning IRR and EBITDA, and I'm understanding what drives valuations and how leadership can impact the opportunity for a team to really expand and to grow. I'm understanding why people pursue investment opportunities in and around the asset class of sports, or why people might want to step away from them. So that in and of itself, like understanding team ownership, the whys, the whos, the whats, the pipes, like looking under the hood, that is fascinating. And, ultimately, it's given me visibility into a world that has transparently been gatekept from us for a really, really long time.
Talk about it.
So that is super exciting to me, and I'm really, really thankful for the role. And it's one of those things when you're immersing yourself in something new, you're just like, yo, okay, what's that mean?
Soaking it all up.
Give me more. Give me more. So that is kind of one aspect of it. And the other aspect is, I get to roll up my sleeves and kind of tap back into my content.
Still kind of go back into your roots, so to speak.
Yeah, and do it from with a more macro lens where I can call my guys at TikTok and my homies at Meta and Instagram and Snap and Threads
Yeah.
and help teams and franchises think about holistic ways
Mm-hmm.
to be more strategic as it relates to
Platforms.
content marketing and
Mm-hmm.
as it relates to leveraging digital to deepen their
Digital
fan,
inclusion of
yeah,
product
all of
sales,
that.
growing global fan bases, all the
Mhm.
likes. Now, okay, let's talk about. We've talked. Let's talk about some of your favorite digital, and sports media trends that you're excited about now. Obviously, like you said, this is a space that changes daily.
Mhm.
Um, but what are you seeing that's kind of like, huh, this is cool. Like, this is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just enamored with how teams and leagues are starting to leverage artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going anywhere. And as a matter of fact, those who lean in and are early adopters will be advantaged in this kind of new horizon
These
of
are
digital
words
disruption.
that are being spoken from someone who leaned in and early adopted. So,
Yeah, yeah, no, like if you say, all right, it's weird. Like I'm
tad bit.
fearful a little bit,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
I'm gonna see what this thing is about. I'm gonna
yeah,
start to create prompts within,
yeah.
AI tools and services that I use. There are AI tools that you can say, I need a deck built about X, Y, and Z, and you'll get it in moments. You problem solving that would typically take days, months, years.
Efficiency is an
It's
understatement
it
when it
is
comes to the use of artificial
it
intelligence,
it, it is insane. You're traveling to Paris for the first time. Give me a list of 10 places I should visit, 10 places I should eat, 10 places that I probably won't like. Like
Right.
it all exists at our fingertips in real time. I am super excited about how teams are starting to lean in. I mean, one of the early trends that I've loved is teams are leaning into AI to transcribe content across different languages,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Mm-hmm.
if you're watching an NBA clip,
Mm-hmm.
but your first language is Spanish or
Mm-hmm.
Yoruba,
Mm-hmm.
like AI can transcribe that in real time. It's just really, really dope to see how it's
Yeah.
being leveraged.
Yeah.
And I'm excited for the opportunity that exists, not only for the sports industry, but for Africa,
For
quite
Africa
honestly.
as a whole,
Yeah.
yeah. And obviously, you caught a great segue there because I wanted to speak to the continent in two separate conversations. One of which being our previous conversation in the growth and expansion of teams, franchises, leagues. Specifically on the continent. I mean, there's a lot happening in that space, right?
Mm-hmm.
Has there there's this argument that it's
Uh-oh.
still early,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Has there ever been a better time to buy and or invest? And what I mean by that, I don't mean necessarily in the athletes and the human capital per se. I'm talking about in the creation of franchises, whether they be soccer, basketball, or any other sport. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, it's why I mentioned women's sports a bit earlier. Like you've obviously seen what's happening with the W and their recent rights renewal. I mean, an exponential growth and well-deserved growth with respect to the investment that they're seeing year over year.
Hmm.
Um, Angel City with Bob Iger and
That valuation was what, 3 years?
yeah. It's insane to see. Maybe four. It's insane to see like the growth that has occurred in that franchise.
Yeah.
But then you've got Bob Iger and his wife Willow, who are like, you know what, this makes sense for us, and we're gonna invest at a multiple. So I use that as a comp. It's not apples to oranges,
Right.
but it's to say that there was just 3 years ago I was seeing dudes on Twitter say like, "Why are you showing this highlight? Put an apron on, get in the kitchen, right?" And here we are, where people are making hundreds of millions of dollars because it's good
Because it's
business.
really good
It's good
business.
business.
Yeah.
So I, I I see the energy and the excitement in and around women's sports, and as we're here
Hmm.
talking about the opportunities that exist on the continent, and there is a significant amount of energy around across the diaspora.
Hmm.
There are diasporans that are really, 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 really moving and shaking out here,
Hmm.
and are calling shots and have the ability to change the world.
Hmm.
Um, you know, probably, if we took a shot for every time Luol Deng was said over the course of the Olympics, we'd all be wasted right now,
I
and
think
rightfully so.
we just have to
Rightfully
slow
so.
clap, right?
Yeah, yeah. But you think about a person like Luol, right? Like, who is leveraging his platform and his resources to drive generational change.
Infrastructural. I think I've over the past couple of weeks, and you can tell me what your experience has been, but over the past couple of weeks, every time that conversation has come up, for whatever reason, I have taken the time to tell said person conversation, like, listen, I want you to understand how much bigger than basketball this
Sure,
move is.
sure.
And I almost want, and of course we talked about the just narratives, right? And the power of social for narrative or to alter narratives. And I'm like, I really would love for us to shine a light on the fact that he's using sport as a tool. And you just spoke about the strength of tools. You can have a tool in your hand and not know absolutely what
Right.
to do
That's
with
right.
it, right? You can
Right.
minimize the returns or the yields, but this is going to be something that, dare I say, Luol for president, I don't know, it might be coming sometime soon, But to your point, leveraging these platforms for just infrastructural change beyond sport, but using sport as a vehicle to reach that.
Yeah, and I mean, the folks who have been doing the work for such a long time, the Amadous and the Pops and Joakim and there's just so many people. Obviously Masai, but I say that to say that one, like all the work is being done across the diaspora, and two, there's just this really rich energy around it, which is super exciting. Um, the obvious challenge that we hear.
I
all
was
the
gonna say,
time-
let me be polarizing in a way, right? If
Yeah.
we can't always glamorize, I think that sometimes we fall in this dream or microcosm of just glamorizing growth because one person has achieved a feat that hasn't been achieved ever before. At what point do we ask ourselves, or do we say, great, clap for that, wonderful? However, how do we either expedite, or what do we need? What isn't being done?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the glamorization is to encourage people, and because it's not easy work. It's hard. Like, ask Luol how much he's investing in personal resources
Say
to make this happen.
personal resources, as in open your own pocketbook, and I mean,
Yeah.
for years on end,
Yeah. So I think in order to feel like there's hope, in order to feel like the opportunity is within reach, like it's important to look at all the African kids who've been drafted in the NBA over the past decades. It's important to look at the work that OC and the NFL is doing, starting to do on the continent, and a commercial that was shot and filmed in Africa, produced by Africans on the biggest scale in sports, which was the Super Bowl, right? Like, it's important to see those things, experience those things, to shine a light on them, to galvanize. So I say all that to say that some of the one of the obvious challenges that we all face are infrastructure challenges, right? And when you're talking, and sitting in these rooms with people who possess a ton of capital, their objective is to invest and deploy capital to make more
To
capital.
then gain the
Right.
capital back, right?
So if there is any doubt in leadership, the capacity to drive, the capacity to execute, or whether the investment is going to fail because of a lack of infrastructure, bro, they're just going to invest in something else, right? So part of the challenge that we're all tasked with is finding ways to ensure that we develop the infrastructure that needs to exist in order to do that, or
sustain
and
these
to and to
businesses.
catalyze it as well. Because again, there are people on the ground doing the work,
Facts.
and oftentimes another challenge that I would say I talk about with my folks all the time is just fragmented efforts, because we all want.
Everybody doing the same thing in 17 million different places,
It
right?
is insane.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
oftentimes, like picking up the phone and saying, "Oh, you working on this? I'm working on this.
yeah,
How can we bring this together
yeah.
to elevate all
Now, would
boats?"
you say that this is look? And again, I'm not here to have real conversations. Like to your point, would you say obviously we're stronger? We're stronger together. We are a collective, communal society in general. Is that one of our biggest downfalls as a people in terms of I wouldn't necessarily pride, you know what I mean? But how do we work to over what institutions, what forums exist to help us, overcome that downfall? We've identified it's one thing to know it, but what next?
Yeah, I mean, I it called me a serial optimist, but I think that the forum that exists to kind of defy those traditional challenges is the hope that exists in all of us. The fact that we're here at the Olympics talking about the opportunity that exists on the continent. The fact that we can point to a Luol Deng in a boardroom and say, like, this is what driving like actual value and which does develop into business long term looks like these are the opportunities that exist. It's pointing at the BAL and saying, like, look at how young this property is and look at the growth that's existed. It's reading the kids' names who've been drafted in the NFL and the NBA and saying, yeah, they're African, they're African, they're African, they're African.
It's the names on the back of the jersey.
Yeah.
It's all of that.
It's all of it. It's all of it. And then, like, leveraging that to and mobilizing, which is hard.
And dare I say, but I mean, I just had a conversation earlier with Todd Ramasar, and we were talking about obviously his work with Pascal Siakam, and I think that the optimism should also be fueled by the fact that the pipeline can turn fast, right? We are already seeing. I mean, we talk about nepotism all the time, and that's like the conversation. But in a way, we're already seeing products of the academy. So the Galo setting up a seed in Senegal 20 years ago, the NBA, putting an academy in Senegal. And then now we're looking at, the products of that. We're seeing Pops taking seed and putting it in Ghana and doing what you said, which is working alongside a property and an entity that already exists and creating that. We're already seeing Joel Embiid, opening the door, or the players from Cameroon, funneling in from BWB programs. We're already seeing, yields of what happens when you at Masai with GOA, right? We're already seeing alumni and products of those of such programs that exist in less than 7 years.
And also, you're seeing Klay Thompson outdance Festus in Cameroon. You heard what I said, Fest. Klay got you.
And then
Klay got
hey,
you.
Grant, I just want to see your dance moves too, because
Klay went. Klay floated. I said Fest on side. What happened? Who is the Africa? Yo, the way Klay just disastered you.
I was just waiting for Diamond Platinums to be like, what is going on?
We gotta get Klay on the Amapiano Afrobeats record for sure. In the video for sure. Shout out to Chloe and Maud as well.
Yeah.
But we're seeing like folks like, yo, why don't you come to the continent with me? Let's check it out. Let's go to Josie. Let's go to Accra. Let's go to Nairobi. Let's go to Kigali. Let's go to Lagos. Pull up, and I'll show you a time.
Yeah.
And we're all flying our flags so proudly, and we're all serving as ambassadors. It really, really, really makes me feel. Makes me feel really prideful knowing how much we collectively care. It also it keeps me up at night knowing knowing how steep some of the hurdles are that we'll have
we're
to
yet to
clear
face. Yeah.
to get here, because what to me, I don't want to use the term scary, but what is daunting is self-sabotage at times, and when people operate in self-interest that can, without any recourse, that can
The exponential detrimental effect of either delaying or disrupting or destroying
Yeah,
the momentum that has catapulted us thus far. It's almost one of those things where it's like, you want to be careful. You want to progress, but you want to be protective. But you
sure.
also, you know what I mean? Of and we talk about this all the time. It's the narrative, right? And also the progress and whatever have you. And with that being said, look, the continent is, sport is something that's driven by youth, whether it's fans,
Hmm.
consumption, whether it's hell, athleticism,
Sure.
and obviously projections are what they are. I speak it at least once a day, every day now. The numbers are that the continent will, in the next 25 years, be the youngest, most populous, you know, continent on this
On Earth.
planet.
That's right.
Now the other numbers that I point to all the time are the adoption of digital and the use of digital all across the
Hmm.
continent, with over 70%. And it's crazy because you think about Africa and you're like, 70 of where, but mobile, because of the emphasis of fintech and
Hmm.
being integrated into day-to-day life is essential, right? So having your background and obviously the knowledge and expertise, wouldn't that seem like, what are your thoughts on using that ecosystem, right? And I mean that digital, to continue to drive, the to drive sport, I mean, on the continent. But I think about that because I'm like, there's one thing to consume, but then how do we then turn that into growing? You know what I mean? The infrastructure, because consumption is wonderful, and we can be fans of teams all around the world. But what about us, and what about our products? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you know, part of why globalization um, has become so ubiquitous is because of technology. Part of why the affinity that we have for our homelands continues to deepen is because we don't have to wait to hear an Ashake song. We don't have to wait to hear a Burner song or a Wiz song. Like, I remember having to like get
Get
I'd
the
be late. You go home and
CDs
get it
and
late. You
get
know what I'm saying?
it
We're
late.
within a tweet, a thread, a IG, whatever.
Yeah.
Burner says I'm going live tonight. I'm dropping my album tonight.
Global. Yeah.
Globally.
Global.
So
Yeah.
technology has kind of bridged this these global gaps that have existed in a way that I don't know if any of our our forefathers would have even
Would have ever
like.
fathomed. Can you imagine, fella? Let's see. We can go further back than that, right? 'Cause I always like to think that we feel like, when it comes to music or sport, that there are these beginning points that we've
Yeah,
marked as like,
yeah,
but there were a lot way
of course,
before. You know what
of
I
course.
mean? Can you just imagine if they had access to, what we have access to now, like what that would have looked like in terms of, and I say this in terms of like ownership, in terms of IP, in terms of knowledge exchange, in terms of, even preservation of out. And look, I love, the fact that we've been able to be in the diaspora, but having to stay at home or still be able to spread the message without having to quote unquote like leave home per se.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I always think it's very. I always think our forefathers are wherever they are. They're like, oh my
That's right.
goodness. You know
Yeah,
what I mean?
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you're seeing like records that have been around for decades resurface because of TikTok challenges and, folks all over the world moving to the beat of a drum that was struck in Soweto. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So that sounded beautiful.
Yeah.
Um,
Struck in
but
Soweto. Who wants to make that album?
you
See,
know what I'm saying?
CJ coming soon. I love.
Um, I think and that's why I'm so bullish and long on AI
Yeah.
and tech as a catalyst to
Yeah.
connect and to drive change when there's political unrest. The youth know to hop on their mobile device and
Record.
record and
Document. Right.
to tell their stories.
Mm-hmm.
So, to answer your question more succinctly, um, I think there's a really exciting opportunity to empower, to continue to empower the youth to not only understand the capability of the tools that exist to them,
Right.
but inspire them to understand that, that mobile device can unlock a whole new world that you can access.
Okay, now the former DJ in me just has to ask, since we're talking predictions, TJ, when are we seeing an NFL African themed music halftime show?
Gonna take a little bit of time. It's gonna take a little bit of time. But the fact that you even asked me the question is significant to even like ponder, because if you would have asked me 10 years ago when we'd see a rapper at halftime, I might have the same reaction.
Response and reaction.
And just a couple of years ago, we
Yeah.
saw Snoop, we saw M, we saw 50.
Oh, we saw West Coast
We
up
saw
there on
all
some
of it.
like, hey, and it was real West Coast. It wasn't
It
filtered.
was.
It was not diluted. It was nothing.
was.
It was just what it was. You know.
And Burna performed at All Star. What? 2
I was gonna
years
say,
ago?
listen, speaking of pulling up old exes and tweets, like, yeah, I was one of those people who was like, it's coming, and I went
Yeah.
back and I pulled it and I put it right there with the clip, you know.
Tweeted into
yeah.
existence. That's right. We love to see that.
uh-huh.
So it certainly is within the realm of possibility. There was a full blown ad on the NFL Africa opportunity in the Super Bowl. So nothing.
Does that
is
count as,
impossible.
if I had to ask you, to give me one of your favorite African sports moments, would that be atop the list? You brought it up a few times, obviously for the incredible value,
Yeah,
media value, and that I mean, and so many other things. But what if you had to rank like your top favorite? I would say African sports moment. What would it be?
Hakeem winning back-to-back championships for sure. That was pretty. That was pretty pivotal for me. But more recently, I mean I watched that. I was at the Super Bowl and they played it on the big screen, and it was hard to not get emotional. And then there was an interview that you may have seen with OC,
Chelsea, yes.
and to see how like emotional he got about it was
Yeah.
really special because it's a labor of love. Like no amount of number every 2 weeks.
It's gonna make that field. It's not gonna hit. It's not gonna hit.
It's not going.
Yeah.
They don't. It pales in comparison.
Yeah, yeah.
So that was certainly one of them. I think Giannis winning MVP was a pretty special one because we've watched the journey, and we're continuing to watch Giannis understand what his identity
His
looks and
identity,
feels like,
and then harness that into power.
yeah, and
you know?
I feel like we all reflect on our lives, and we all have these transitive moments where, many of us, particularly that grew up in the States, may have shied away from our Africanness early on because you're embarrassed, long last name, you brought pounded yam to lunch, and people were like, what
People
do you
talked
eat?"
about you for just
All of
being
that.
you for everything you did and didn't do. You
All
know.
of that. So many of us, thankfully, with experience and with age and with just this excitement and energy around the diaspora, have really started to like
Come into our own.
yeah. And
own.
I say that to say that everybody's journey is different. So, like for someone like Giannis who grew up in Greece, sure, it's going to take time for him to develop those feelings for
Process.
himself.
Yeah.
Like to go to the content. Yeah, you're eating the food at home and you're listening to your parents, but it takes time for you to experience that on your own.
Yeah,
And I think
yeah.
everybody has their own journeys, and what is inevitable is we'll all go down that path.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm excited to see what that looks like for Joel as he's starting to
he starts to do the
explore
same.
that.
Yeah. Let's talk about it a little bit. What do you think about the flack that's, he's catching a little bit for playing for Team USA?
Man, he's getting a lot of it. I wonder. He genuinely seems to be unbothered. You know what I'm saying?
'Cause
About everything.
And I'm not calling. I'm saying because a gold medal is a gold medal if
no,
that's how we get it. You know what I mean?
But more broadly, he's just an unbothered person.
In general,
Like,
yeah.
my man had one eye and one leg and was giving my local Knicks 40. You know what I'm saying? Like, he's elite at his craft.
Yeah.
That said, a lot of the vitriol he's getting is from people who, like, grew up in Prince George's County, Maryland. You know what I'm saying?
So it's like, what's the difference between him. Well, I will say this. For me personally, when I made that comment, I was like, "Ooh, if Cameroon had Joel, then make." I mean, because to get so close and then start to look and be like, "Okay, what other pieces could we bring?" But I mean, that's hypothetical. But to your point, why is it that we play so? Again, I had this conversation with Todd where he was like, "Look, do we place this very same pressure on first generation?" African players who were born in the U.S. and play for for Team USA, for Bam Adebayo. Why are we not having that same energy?
Yeah, and it's not new. Like all you gotta do is watch Champions League or the World Cup every few years. Like the lion's share of the best talent in football is likely playing for a European
I mean, we
team.
were caught, what was it, France a couple years ago, where we were like,
Like
that's
African
African
team,
team. Like, what are
right?
you talking about? And
So
dutifully so, right?
yeah,
Dutifully so. You know.
yeah. So I think a few things are at play. One, that a lot of these folks just have to. A lot of them are super young, and 19, 20, 21, whatever. They got to go through their journey.
Yeah.
Two, you even look at Luol. Like he Luol is one of those guys has always done the work, but once he retired, he's like, okay, like now
Now it's time.
Joe Kim
Joe
Noah
Kim the
same
same
way. He's
way.
like, all right, I've got a little capacity now. Like I'm going to focus my efforts here. Their job is to play 82 game regular season and
Can
to
I
play in the
can I can I
postseason.
get ahead of that real quick too? Their job is to feed the
That's
families
right.
and the
That's
people
right.
around them, the
That's right.
staffs that they
That's
have to
right.
pay, and they certainly cannot do the work that they're doing right now. Because tell me how you sit for 5, 6, 7 odd years and fund a basketball team from head coach to 15th player
Which is exactly what it'll require.
to facilitate, which is what it requires. So to your point, we have to start placing. We got to put. We know how was it the cart in front of the horse in front of the cart. You got to get the money.
Yeah, so to answer your question, it's just so nuanced and it's not as simple as
As we
saying,
break it down
hey,
to be.
I'm going to play for Team Nigeria. It's
Yeah.
not that simple.
Yeah.
It absolutely is not that simple.
Yeah,
If
yeah.
it were, we'd see a lot more.
Ask Josh
people
Okogie how long that took him, you know what I mean, to actually want to do something and then not be able to do it for reasons that ask him, you know what I mean?
Yeah, there are a lot of really complex pieces at play, but even like more broadly, if you're doing the work and you don't play for your team country, there are other ways to
To
do
do
the
it.
work,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
oftentimes, unfortunately, I'll prioritize 10 out of 10 times somebody doing the work, rolling up the sleeves and doing the work, versus versus if the alternative is them putting on a jersey for 3 weeks and then not doing any of the work on the continent, I'll take you doing the work
Go
on the
ahead, do the
continent
work. Yeah, yeah.
10 out of 10
yeah,
times.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, the harsh reality is putting on the jersey at the Olympics can benefit parties that may not have the same
Interest.
interests as you do.
1000%. TJ, you and I could sit here and this conversation would extend into perpetuity for obvious
Yeah.
reasons, but
Can't do that.
we've got some things to
That's
do. We've
right,
got some
that's
people to
right.
see. So I want to bring this on home. A couple of questions, and then we can close this thing on out. Obviously, you and I have been extremely fortunate to, like we talked about, going back to where we started to work in sport. And obviously, we talked about infrastructure and the growth of sport on the continent. What are your thoughts on making sure that as we build that foundational aspect of it, whether it be the facilities, whether it be the leagues, whether it be the federations, whether it be that we're also empowering and encouraging our youth to understand the employment opportunities around the sporting ecosystem that don't require you to put on cleats, shoes, a jersey, and or be the player, right? Like, how can we continue to drive that educational opportunity, for lack of a better way, so that when these players are coming out, they also have agents, they also have support staff, they're also, talking about being GMs and not necessarily here, maybe over there, right? So, like, is that, what's the importance of that and how do we do it?
I think a lot of that is happening organically now because there are just way more opportunities for us. There are way more lanes. When I was coming up, there wasn't a head of sports at Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. There wasn't a Luke Mbamute who's the head of Africa at CAA Sports. Um, there just weren't as many roles or opportunities. And again, back to gatekeeping, some of them, most of them, were gate kept from us. So as we're like growing up in the business of sport and growing up in this kind of digital era,
Right.
we have proximity and access to these roles that have never existed in the past. And one thing about Africans, we're resilient. You know what I'm saying? Black people as a
There we
whole.
go, another
You
R
know what I'm
word.
saying?
Lord, what is it?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You know, people people are just resilient.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
once you kind of see a glimmer of light, you're gonna run toward
Gravitate
that.
toward it.
So
Yeah.
I think a lot of it is happening organically,
Yeah.
and us having these conversations, and
Yeah.
people who might operate in a role that's non-traditional but still existing within sports, telling their stories. It's one of the reasons why I get excited to do these types of things. 'Cause people are like, oh, where there was people at Twitter or Instagram who
Yeah.
did that?
Yeah.
Okay, what's that look like?
Yeah.
And just continuing to fly the flag and walk with pride and evangelize our stories with the opportunities that exist for the youth
For the youth to come.
to go bigger and better.
Right. Now, look, we're here at the Olympics. You know, there have been a lot of medals given out and awarded to a lot of different standout athletes, but there are a few key competitions that are yet to conclude. Obviously, it was, heart-wrenching, for South Sudan not to continue that Cinderella story all the way into as far as they could take it. But guess what? We still have our history-making
That's right.
Nigerian women's basketball team. And I've been having to correct a lot of people where I'm like, no. They are the first team,
That's right.
period,
Yeah.
men and or women, to advance thus far into the quarterfinals, into the Olympics. And obviously, daunting matchup with Team USA ahead of us tomorrow. But is it really? I don't know. You know what I mean? Those girls have showed a lot of grit. You know what I mean? It's an incredible story from a member of the diaspora answering a call to go home and, contribute to the ecosystem and become head coach, to the makeup of all those players, and talk about resilience, right? Let's talk about, it's well documented what those women have gone through in terms of, treatment, in terms of a lot of things. But what is most exciting for you about watching that game tomorrow?
Yeah, I'm the reason I'm here.
I was going to say, I know for a fact, we know personally,
Yeah.
the reason you are here is that.
Yeah, they are a key factor as to why I even put up in the first place.
Yeah.
You know this. We have this event called the Battle of Jollof
Yes.
in New York, which is
Yes.
a celebration of food, culture, music, all the things.
Yes.
And several of the women on the team have actually played in the Battle of Jollof. Just to tap in, like, these are women who are not only playing with our country on their jersey, but they're doing it while tapping in. They're like part of the community, and they can hoop, they can go. So I'm super excited to support them, to wave the flag. It's gonna be a tough game tomorrow, but they're gonna ball and they're gonna leave it all on the court, and they're going to shout out to Coach Reyna too.
Coach
32
Reyna,
years old.
I cannot wait. For me, we talk about content and storytelling. I actually think that one of another huge asset class for us is IP ownership. And when I say IP ownership, I mean, in terms of. So, yes, absolutely. So, 1,000%. So, I think the IP class is ownership, storytelling, content, obviously a huge class. So, I would love for her story to be turned into some sort of a movie and or miniseries.
So many
whole thing.
favor advancing in the 200 as well. There are so many incredible stories to tell about folks who are of our heritage, and it's really, really special. Africa to the world, for real.
For real.
And super excited to see this blackness displayed
1,000%.
for the world to see.
Yes, I love it. Listen, TJ, it's always a pleasure, always an honor. Thank you so much for your dedication to your craft, but also for always availing yourself for conversations as such, knowing that it is much bigger than us, always being willing to throw the rope down, always being able, willing to sow the seeds, plant some more, sow the seeds so that you can see a lot more grow, where it came from. So thank you so much. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you for having me. I need you at Battle of Jollof. It's occurring in Q4. November.
You have
2nd,
a verbal.
Need you there.
You have a verbal
Need you there.
commitment that I might
you there.
come out of retirement.
Need you there.
We'll figure out what I'm
You
gonna do.
need Ivy
But I
in
was-
the building. We got some special announcements.
Yes.
Shout out to Abdul, Afro Future. Shout out to Renze. Battle Jaluf is coming, and we're gonna hopefully have some NBA,
surprises.
WNBA
I love that. I'll be there. Hopefully you will be too at Tjay Adeshola. Thank you so much for joining us right here on the Afroballers podcast. And we will see you somewhere around the world next time.
Let's do it.
All right.
Appreciate you.
Appreciate you.